Our episode begins with Brett reminiscing about his childhood with his brother Alan. Since the day that the kindest woman in the world had left them, Brett had only been afraid. Brett showed his father a stone and said it was very beautiful. But his father only looked at him with disdain and pity. He heard the girls who worked in the house saying that he only knew how to joke, while Alan was incredible. He also remembers when he was on the beach and his brother Alan asked him why he was on the beach and if anything had happened, and Brett wouldn't answer and slapped his hand. Alan also asked why you who are still watching and aren't subscribed haven't subscribed to the channel. What are you waiting for? Subscribe so you don't miss the updates. They had many conflicts because Brett thought Alan was just like their father. And then Brett wakes up from his dream. He finds it very annoying to remember everything and says good morning to his father. His father laughs as he reads a letter. And Brett asks what happened. And his father asked when they would begin their revenge against that kingdom, against the gods. Brett thought he was the only one worthy of ruling that kingdom. Then some people whispered about the general coming back. He had served the king faithfully for many years. For Clark, who was with Captain Edward, as usual the city was full of gossip. Rumors that General Cyril, supposedly dead, had reappeared, and this had made people nervous. For him, it was inevitable to a certain extent, but that was quite different. It seems to be spreading too fast. For Captain Edward, everything was being spread deliberately as a form of incitement. Clark asked Captain Edward what he thought of all this, whether the reappearing general was an impostor or not. But Edward replies that he shouldn't be fooled by the information. Even if he was an impostor or a ghost, that didn't change what the first squadron of knights had to do. If anyone wanted to harm the kingdom, they would stop them. Clark just says. Captain Edward says that if he were there, that's what he would do. Cyril had protected that kingdom for a long time, and they would uphold his will. They even enter an alleyway hearing a noise and ask who was there. Even an ironic old man says they were scary, and then they discover it's the Archbishop. Edward asks what he was doing there without an escort. The Archbishop replied that there was something he wanted to do that only Edward could know about and asked him to come along. Clark thinks it's dangerous, and Edward doesn't see a problem as he wasn't going into battle. At the moment, gathering information was their top priority. Edward asks Clark not to worry as he will be back soon and asks Clark to take care of them. Clark watches Edward go with a frightened look on his face. And then the Archbishop and Captain Edward arrive at their destination. Where they were was the training camp, and Edward asked why the Archbishop had brought him there. The Archbishop replied that his participation ended there. Edward realizes that the Archbishop has simply disappeared. Then the Westfelt Patriarch attacks Edward, who manages to defend himself at the same time. Edward says it's not bad, yet he's so full of bloodlust. Craig, Alan, and Brett's father says that Edward hasn't changed. Edward says that the only one who would attack him without so much as a greeting would be him. It had been a while since the two had seen each other. Craig Westfelt remembers that he hasn't seen him since his wife died. Edward asks what Craig's intentions are now. Patriarch Westfelt says that Edward is a great fool because the Archbishop already belongs to them. And then he attacks again, and Edward doesn't understand what he means and asks what he's done. Craig finds it all very nostalgic, as he had crossed swords with Edward so many times in his life, but Craig no longer needed that world, which Edward is shocked to hear. We then see Brett thinking about and remembering his dead mother when he asks why their mother was asleep, and Alan replies to Brett that she had died. Brett doesn't understand, and Alan says that everyone dies one day. Brett cries a lot at that moment, and Alan takes his hand to support him. Next, we see Alan asking if Brett wasn't going to sleep, and Brett, instead of answering his question, he comes back with another question about what a loser was. And Alan asks him why he asked him that question, and Brett asks him if he was a failure, and Alan tells him that he was not. There is no value in arbitrary judgments made by other people. Brett thought it was a lie, and Alan disagreed, saying that it wasn't. Brett cries because his father said he was a failure and that Alan was a liar, and ends up leaving. And then we see Craig saying that he never thought Brett's level would rise first, exactly what he expected from his son, which makes Brett very happy to hear. And Craig asks Alan what he was doing standing there looking at him and tells him to get out of there, calling him a failure. Alan stopped standing out so that his brother would be all right, but his brother didn't understand and always treated him with an air of superiority. No matter what anyone said about Alan, he always acted as if nothing had happened, and that annoyed Brett. Brett told Alan that he didn't deserve to inherit the Westfeld house, but he did. Alan just told Brett that he knew him and knew that everything would be all right. And even then, if the worst comes to the worst, and Brett chooses the wrong path. And then Brett realizes, wondering why he was remembering that moment. And then a hooded being appears in front of Brett, saying that negotiations on their side were continuing without a hitch, and asks about Brett's side. Brett asks if he knew what his power was, and he says that they used the Archbishop to lure Edward. And the guy says that Edward's gift was problematic because he could nullify any other gift within a radius of 1 meter, as his title, Disaster, indicates he was almost invincible in battle. He would disrupt the plans they had, and Brett says that his father was already sorting it out and there was nothing to worry about. Even in the worst case scenario, he could use his special ability and put the plan into action without being affected by Edward's gift. And he asks if the other side was going to work, because their side was only failing, and another demon appears, warning that the hero has appeared. Then one of them said they were going to play knights. The demon said they were lending their strength, and mistakes on Brett's part would not be tolerated. But Brett says he won't make a mistake. In Brett's mind, he wasn't a failure like his brother. We then see Akira telling Sarah to be careful not to get separated from her near the crowd, and the girl hugs Akira tightly. Akira tells her that he said he wouldn't leave her behind, and then they decide to walk again. When the dust settled, Akira would look for a place for Sarah to live safely. At that moment, there was a demon watching everything. Akira asked the demons who were chasing them how long the hide and seek would last. Radiating bloodlust like that, it was impossible for Akira not to notice. The demon says that this only makes everything faster because she would die right there. Akira asks if they really think they can beat her. The demon doesn't disagree, but it would only be unlikely to win if she were alone. And Akira asks if they're going to attack her, but the demon says she hasn't understood correctly. Then he casts a spell on Sarah, who begins to feel something strange. Akira asks what happened, and the demon replies that all the inhabitants of that village had the magical symbol inscribed on their bodies by the demons that used their lives as fuel for an explosion. Just throw a ball of fire and the child will explode. The demon wonders if she would die in the explosion too, or abandon the child and run away. He asks again what the heroine is going to do. Sarah pushes Akira, telling her to run away. And the demon throws a fireball at Sarah, but Akira says that a hero would never run away. Then one of the soldiers told Vice Captain Clark that he was looking a bit pale. Clark replies that he was worried about the captain. And they understood how he felt, but he was the captain, they were sure he was all right. And Clark agrees, thinking that he'll still get a lecture for worrying. And at that moment a demon appeared in front of them. Clark asks who it is and tells everyone to wait and make no move, and thinks that one look was enough to know, alone they had no chance against him, he didn't know what he could do. The demon says he has nothing to tell them and tells them to listen. He's going to tell them the truth about that world. And at that moment there was the Archbishop and General Cyril. General Cyril apologizes to the people for frightening them with recent events, and he was in front of everyone at that moment to bring out the whole truth. And the Archbishop says that the gods were lying to everyone. The gifts are not blessings that the gods grant them. General Cyril asks them to think for a moment. If this gift had been given to one of them, had it been for another, many would have been disappointed at the blessing ceremony, because one would have wanted to be a baker or confectioner, the other would have wanted to be a salesman or traveler and have traveled to many distant lands. What restricts their freedom and decides their lives for them is the gift they receive, and none of them chose theirs of their own free will. The Archbishop says they are all slaves of the gods. The gods would be using these gifts to control everyone like puppets. But there is one way to escape from these clutches, seduced the bishop, and that was to give up his gifts. He goes on to say that it was time for everyone to free themselves from the gods and take your future into your own hands. And people started whispering about what the Archbishop was saying because they were so confused. The general says he has prepared an answer to all the people's questions and asks Brett to come forward to speak. Brett points to one side and asks people to look. And at that very moment a magical life form appears, according to Brett. But people find it difficult to replace that giant thing with the gift of all. And Brett shows off his puppetry skills. The Archbishop explains more about how the puppet works, saying that thanks to that life form and Brett's ability, they were going to a new era. Everyone thinks about what it would be like after Brett dies. And then Brett said that the demons would be there when they needed them. And everyone gets scared. Brett says that it's understandable that everyone is like that and asks them to stay calm as they have established a cooperative relationship with them. The truth that the kingdom had hidden was revealed by the demons, according to the Archbishop. And Brett reinforces that they don't need gifts, telling everyone to join together and think about the life they want to lead. The time has come for everyone to be free. Brett thought he was worth more than anyone else in the world. And while all this was going on, Craig was fighting Edward. It's very clear to Craig who will win that glove. And Edward knows that the gift should have cancelled it out, but Craig's strength was surreal. And then Edward says that he understands Craig's level. Craig says that he finally realized that everyone gave too much importance to the gifts, but it's the level that really means something. Raising your level is raising the status of your spirit. In other words, the individual becomes a higher existence and comes closer to the gods. For Craig, the level could give him the strength to kill even a god. Meanwhile, the demon was telling Vice Captain Clark that the gifts were used to manipulate them. And Clark asked him what difference it made. Even if it were true, they were still knights. If someone was going to harm the kingdom, they would stop it. They would continue to be the shield of the people and the nation. And the demon says that they are all fools and then starts killing them one by one. And Clark doesn't know what to do until he is attacked, and even then he asks the soldiers not to lose focus. And the demon says that with that wound, he couldn't do anything. Clark tells him not to make him laugh, because that's what being a knight was all about. Then, suddenly, Beatrice appears to help Clark. Meanwhile, Edward ends up falling down as a result of Craig's injuries. Craig says that Edward had already seen the difference in their strength, and says that Edward is unworthy. And then a demon appears and Craig asks if he's finished with the hero. But it was actually Akira in disguise. When the fireball was about to hit the child, she used a shield to protect her. And then she finished them all off. What's more, Alan had changed the girl's magic seal. Akira wondered how Alan knew all this. And while all this was going on, Brett was still trying to convince the people, and he was succeeding. But Alan arrives to break up the party, and Brett asks what he's doing there, calling him a failure.